If you're like most people, you probably think you know Thanksgiving. It's, pilgrims, a big feast in 1621, some friendly Native Americans, and a turkey or two. It's really held up as this quintessential American origin story.
It is. It's the origin story that has been taught over and over again, yes. But almost none of that popular imagery actually aligns with the real timeline.
So it's more complicated.
Oh, much more. The Thanksgiving we celebrate today is a holiday that was systematically engineered. It's this rich tapestry woven from, English Calvinist traditions, 19th century nationalist politics, and even 20th century commercial necessity.
That makes it sound far more complex than just a simple harvest dinner. Our sources today are going to take us on a real deep dive into this. Our mission is pretty clear.
Yeah.
We need to dismantle that popular romantic myth of the 1621 first Thanksgiving, explore the surprising political forces that created the holiday we know, and most crucially, bring in the powerful Native American traditions of gratitude that predate any of this.
All right, let's jump in at the start, because the holiday's true DNA,
Yeah.
it isn't a harvest party.
It isn't a harvest party.
Not at all. To really get the roots, you have to look at something called providential holidays. These actually predate the colonies entirely. They come from this very rigid English Calvinist tradition.
And these weren't just spontaneous celebrations, they sound incredibly structured.
These were special days, not annual, and they were designated only by civil authority for very specific religious purposes. You basically had two types.
Okay.
You had days of humiliation or fasting. Those were declared when a community felt God's judgment or, faced a disaster like a plague or a drought.
And the other type?
Days of Thanksgiving. And these were only declared for a very specific, singular blessing. A victory in battle, the end of a drought, something like that.
And our sources confirm that the character of these days was, strict. No merriment allowed.
Absolutely. During a true Puritan day of Thanksgiving, normal work, any kind of secular recreation, feasting, all strictly forbidden.
Yeah.
It was solemn. It was about religious observation.
And we see this tradition applied right away in the colonies.
Immediately. The first documented providential holiday in Plymouth was actually a fast day. It was the summer of 1623.
Right.
The colony was suffering from this devastating drought, threatening their entire harvest. They held a very solemn, intense fast. And then, when it rained shortly after, they declared a day of Thanksgiving.
Which was probably July 30th, 1623.
Exactly. A formal religious service that had absolutely zero connection to a harvest festival.
Okay, so after the Revolution, the idea of a national Thanksgiving pops up here and there. The Continental Congress declared one in 1777 after Saratoga, Washington proclaimed one in 1789.
Right, but there was no consistency. The date kept moving, or it just wasn't observed at all some years.
And that instability is really key, isn't it?
It is. For decades, the holiday was just this inconsistent regional thing. What finally stabilized it and made it an annual national event wasn't religion or harvest.
It was politics.
It was the desperate need for national unity during the Civil War.
Which brings us to Abraham Lincoln in 1863. He's the one who establishes the tradition of the annual holiday on the last Thursday of November. But what's fascinating is he wasn't acting alone. He was responding to this relentless campaign.
He was answering the call of one of the most powerful magazine editors of the entire era, Sarah Josepha Hale.
Right, the editor of Goody's Ladies book.
A magazine with millions of readers. She essentially professionalized the whole campaign for a national Thanksgiving Day. She saw it as a way to bind a deeply fractured nation.
So what was her specific argument?
Her vision was for a shared, patriotic, and deeply domestic holiday. She believed that an annual celebration centered on the home could help unify the country. She petitioned governors, wrote countless editorials, even wrote directly to presidents for, over 36 years?
36 years, wow.
Yeah. She basically gave Lincoln the blueprint for the holiday as a tool for national unity, which he desperately needed during the war.
So the modern holiday structure is really a product of 19th century nationalism, not 17th century Puritanism.
Right.
But if that's the case, how did that 1621 harvest feast become the foundational myth?
Well, that's the genius of American myth-making, right? Historical events get selected and sort of rebranded to serve a current need. Once Lincoln standardized the holiday, the nation needed a romantic origin story.
The peaceable origin story.
Exactly, to justify this big shared celebration.
Okay, so let's look at the reality of that 1621 event as Edward Winslow described it.
It was a 3-day harvest celebration for sure, probably late September, early October. But as we've said, it failed all the requirements of a solemn Puritan Thanksgiving. It included recreation,
Military exercises, hunting.
right, and crucially, the attendees included non-Christian guests.
And those guests were, well, they were surprised guests.
They certainly were. Winslow's account says Massasoit, the Wampanoag leader, arrived with some 90 men.
90.
And the sources suggest they came fully armed and uninvited. They likely heard the colonists' celebratory gunfire and thought it might be an attack by an enemy tribe, so they showed up ready to see what was going on.
And 90 men arriving to eat for 3 days is a huge logistical problem for the colonists.
It was an enormous demand. It actually became a reciprocal event because the Wampanoag hunters, seeing the colonists struggling to feed everyone, went out and brought back 5 deer. Venison for the feast.
Let's talk menu, because this is where that popular image of a big Victorian dinner table just completely breaks down.
It does. They definitely had the venison fowl, which could be wild turkey, but also ducks, geese, and a lot of seafood. Cod, bass, eels, shellfish.
And they also ate something called nasomp. What is that?
Nasump is a traditional Wampanoag dish. It's a boiled cornmeal porridge, often mixed with vegetables or nuts. A real foundational dish.
Yeah.
But the key thing to remember is what they didn't have.
Okay.
There were no potatoes, no wheat flour, so no pies or rolls, no butter, no refined sugar.
So mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, candied yams, all of that is just an anachronistic fantasy.
It's a Victorian fantasy. And the way that fantasy was cemented is really interesting. It goes back to 1841.
What happened then?
The original account of the feast, a text called Mort's Relation, had been basically lost for centuries. When it was rediscovered and reprinted, the editor, Alexander Young, was the very first person to attach the label First Thanksgiving to that 1621 event.
So 1841 is the birth of the myth, but it still needed a few decades to really take hold.
It did. It took hold in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and it was propelled by the public education system.
Why then?
This was the era of massive immigration. Classroom pageants about the Pilgrims were explicitly used for, quote, civic education and American patriotism. They were teaching immigrant children this palatable, romanticized story.
A story of pioneers welcomed by tolerant natives. It just smooths over all the conflict that came later.
Exactly. And that's why the popular art from that time is so inaccurate. You see pilgrims in fictional buckle hats and Wampanoag people wearing Great Plains headdresses. It was about creating a patriotic image, not history.
We have to shift focus now because we need to connect this invented narrative to the real history of thanks that existed long before 1621. I mean, the history of gratitude in North America is thousands of years old.
And it's rooted in native traditions that focus on a sustainable, reciprocal relationship with the world. This is such a vital philosophical contrast to the Puritan idea of Thanksgiving as this one single event.
Right.
The native worldview often incorporates gratitude constantly as a kind of obligation. Many people see themselves as respectful caretakers, not exploiters.
Can you give us an example of how that is, woven into daily life?
Look at the Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy. They begin major ceremonies with the Thanksgiving address, often called the words that come before all else. It's this deliberate, systematic expression of thanks. It acknowledges everything in the natural world, from Mother Earth to the waters, the animals, and the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash. It's a profound reminder of that respectful relationship.
That concept of balance seems to govern daily life, not just big ceremonies. I'm really struck by the Dene concept of hozo.
Hozo, yeah, the Dene or Navajo concept. It's often translated as living in a state of balance, beauty, or harmony with the universe. It isn't just a feeling, it's an active state of being.
An active state.
Right. It reflects the idea that respect for the environment and for others is necessary for everyone to thrive. If you maintain hozo, you're in balance.
And you can see this made tangible in the relationship between food and community identity.
Absolutely. The Yakima people in the Northwest call themselves the Salmon People. Their annual first salmon ceremony reinforces that identity, and it explicitly teaches the younger generation about sustainability.
How to care for the salmon so they always return.
Precisely. And the Muskogee, or Creek people, hold the green corn ceremony. It's a yearly renewal that cleanses and strengthens the community, a tradition that survived even after their forced displacement in the 1830s.
But sadly, the sources also make it clear that the spirit of cooperation from 1621 was incredibly fragile. It was short-lived, with devastating long-term consequences that we're still seeing today.
Oh, absolutely. The relationship between the Wampanoag and the English quickly, quote, degenerated into one of conflict and war by 1675. And across the continent, colonial expansion led to this massive destruction of land and traditional food resources, shattering those reciprocal relationships.
The destruction of the Buffalo Nation is probably the most tragic example of this.
It is. I mean, government encouraged mass hunting, wiped out an estimated 30 to 60 million bison in the late 19th century. This wasn't just a loss of an animal. It was the targeted destruction of the physical, cultural, and spiritual sustenance of plains tribes like the Lakota.
They saw the bison as relatives.
Yes. Without the bison, their entire way of life was just destabilized.
And the effects of these policies are still visible in modern health crises today, especially when communities were cut off from their traditional foods.
Look at the Tohono O'odham of southern Arizona. Federal policies promoting industrial farming and flood control. They just diminished their essential water sources. Traditional nutritious foods like protein-rich tepary beans were replaced with processed high-sugar commodities.
And that has contributed directly to a high incidence of diabetes.
It has. It's an ongoing crisis. But we should highlight the modern efforts to combat this, like the Intertribal Bison Cooperative, which is working to restore the Buffalo Nation, or the Tohono O'odham Community Action, which promotes traditional foods to improve health.
Okay, moving into the 20th century, we see the holiday getting more and more intertwined with American commerce, which brings us to a remarkable mid-century political drama, Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving. Yeah, what a fiasco. It was a commercial and political mess driven by economic anxiety. So by 1939, Thanksgiving was traditionally held on the last Thursday of November. But that year, the last Thursday fell on the 30th. Which meant a very short Christmas shopping season during the Great Depression.
And retailers were panicking.
They were. Business leaders convinced President Franklin D. Roosevelt that moving the date up a week to the second to last Thursday would boost the struggling economy. He agreed and issued a proclamation.
This sounds logical, but in practice, it caused total chaos.
Legislative mayhem. 32 states followed FDR, but 16 states, mostly Republican-led, refused to move the date. They stuck with the traditional last Thursday. So for 2 years, you had two separate, competing Thanksgivings.
The Republican Thanksgiving versus the Democratic Thanksgiving.
Literally. And the practical consequences were a nightmare. Families were split on which day to celebrate. Calendars were instantly wrong. Schools had to reschedule football games. It was just widespread confusion.
So to end the madness, Congress finally stepped in.
Yes. In 1941, Congress passed a joint resolution and permanently fixed the date as the fourth Thursday in November, a legal compromise.
And that fixed date allowed the modern spectacle to really flourish. Today, Thanksgiving is the unofficial start of the winter holiday season, cemented by these massive commercial events.
The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, that's been signaling the start of Christmas shopping since 1924. And of course, American football, which is so deeply embedded with the NFL playing games every year since 1945.
Yet that persistent historical dissonance, it really manifests every year at Plymouth Rock.
It does. The Native American-led National Day of Mourning protest has been held there since 1970. Participants use the day to protest the holiday as an embellished story that whitewashes the genocide and injustice that followed colonization.
So you have this dual observation, widespread celebration on one hand, and a solemn protest of profound loss on the other.
It's a reminder of the massive cultural and historical weight the holiday now carries. And that commercial creep is still a point of criticism, with Black Friday sales starting on Thanksgiving Day itself.
Right, forcing retail workers to choose between family time and their job. Though, on the other hand, the spirit of charity is still very strong. You see organizations like the Salvation Army providing communal dinners.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? The Thanksgiving we sit down to today is definitely not a pure commemoration of 1621. It's this rich, complicated tapestry woven from Puritan formality, political necessity, commercial pressure, and thousands of years of Native American reciprocal gratitude.
The history is incredibly messy, but that core theme of gratitude remains strong. And if you reflect on the source material, what really stands out is the enduring wisdom in those traditional indigenous philosophies.
Absolutely. I mean, consider the Wampanoag concept of a reciprocal relationship with the world, or the Diné's pursuit of Hasso, that active state of balance and beauty.
These are philosophies that require communities to be consistent, respectful caretakers, taking only what's necessary and ensuring the well-being of future generations. So that raises an important question for all of us to consider this year. How do these ancient indigenous philosophies focused on community, balance, and ecological sustainability offer enduring, highly relevant models for us today as we face global issues like climate change? It gives you a profound thought to mull over as you gather for your own feast.